That, that was such an incredibly generous, I'm trying to see you. That was such a generous introduction. Thank you so much for that. I actually often tell my students we need to learn to play the game. It's interesting that you don't know me very well, but you knew exactly what I was doing. Getting into those boardrooms, getting into the decision-making areas. At the time of writing that bio, yes, I was the vice president of the South African Institute of Architects. I am now the president of the South African Institute of Architects. Thank you so much. But it took many years for me to be convinced to be there, because we need to be in spaces where we can create change and change those institutions and transform them. And I was joking with a friend that all of my transformation talk is making a lot of people very, very nervous. I am so incredibly honored to be here. Thank you so much for receiving me in this space, in this sacred space. I am a Muslim. I am Sudanese by birth, and I am so incredibly honored to be on this journey with all of you, and it means a lot to me. So I want to tell a story a little bit about Sudanese urbanism, where I'm from. There's one thing that many people don't know about the Sudan, is that there's a very unique form of urbanization in the Sudan. Almost every little village and every major town developed around the burial place of a religious sheikh or around a religious school. It is actually incredible when you see it. Even the little village, a remote little village, you'll find the tomb of the sheikh in the middle, and the biggest city like Omdurman, one of the biggest cities in Africa, also developed around the tomb of a religious leader. So that's a very unique form of urbanization. So the same way that I didn't like to be described early in my career as being a black architect, a black academic, a black woman, I really hated being put in those boxes. But as the years went on, I learned that who I am, I just can't deny who I am, and it does shape some of my experience. And I learned to accept that and work with that. So in a way, spirituality and faith is in my DNA, having grown up in the Sudan. This form of Sudanese Sufism and Sudanese spirituality is who I am. I can't deny it, as I can't deny my height. It's for me, it's the same. So just a few notes before I jump into the presentation is, in our cities, who makes which decisions when? When you said CIB 104, the International Network on Open Building, it's about that. Who makes which decisions when in the built environment? So it's a group of us internationally who really are driving research and practice in this field. It is managing individual aspirations and collective aspirations, and making sure that we exist harmoniously and that we manage any conflict that may arise in the built environment. It's about embracing both formal and informal processes. It's about understanding the short term in the context of the long term. This is very important for me because we're activists, and we need to go out there and promote thinking about equity and equitable cities and so on. But we really need to, whatever we do, understand the short term in the context of the long term. And that's something that open building is very much about. So that brings us to the theme of the event in terms of the everyday, and today's theme in terms of everyday sustainability. I really believe that faith and values determine every professional decision that I make, and I'm sure it determines the decisions that many of you make. So one thing that I would like to, because a lot of us are activists in this field, is just to alert you also to the fact that a lot of my work is around a deeper understanding of the concept of participation. And some people who work on participation get a little bit upset sometimes by the way that I say this, but the form of participation I talk about, and not to undermine this at all, but it is not exclusively or only the sit around the table and talk participation. I think that there's a place for that. It's incredibly important. It's incredibly important to have this gathering. It's important for us to see each other and to feel heard. But there's things that are holding us back, that are holding our cities back, that are keeping people disadvantaged, that are eroding people's access to opportunities and to dignity, and it absolutely has to do with participation and understanding participation at a deeper level. So there won't be time to unpack that fully, but for me, participation is in finance systems. It relates back to what I started with: who makes which decisions when in the built environment? How are funds used? How is the built environment managed? So there's what I call immediate. The sit around the table and talk participation is like immediate, and it will always differ based on a dynamic. If we're talking in a family context, what happens is that by the time the family or the neighbors or the community leave the table, their needs are probably already changing, because needs are dynamic. So we need to build the capacity for change and adaptability into the systems that we put in place in the built environment, so that they can also be agile and adapt to our dynamic needs. So that is actually open building. It's really about that. So in the Apartheid Museum, there's a big panel, a very big panel, with all of the laws and regulations that were put in place to create the apartheid city. And I send my students there, and I just tell them, go and stand in front of that panel and look at all of the laws that were created to keep us in this condition that we just absolutely cannot get out of. And so grassroots initiatives, they're a must, they must happen, but we also need to be very strategic about how we use that power at the grassroots to absolutely change those laws, because otherwise, or to create new ones that will undo what the apartheid system did to our cities. And we grow up and live and experience this reality daily. And what scares me, the same way that I said growing up in these cities in Sudan, that there's certain things that are in my DNA. I don't want that apartheid city structure to be in my DNA. I don't want it to be in the DNA of the children that grow up in it. So I want to put up a board with all of the things we're doing. So we need that grassroots activism, that everyday activism, but with that longer-term vision that this absolutely has to change, and there's an urgency to that. So I believe that space has power. Space is political. Space is not neutral. It has meaning. It tells us, are we valued? Are we important? And do we count? So in that way, space can exclude, it humiliates, intimidates, and angers. And I use this slide often, and you'll see on the side there the drone images of our very divided cities. And I always, for years, I've been quoting, and I don't know who the author is, create inhumane environments, and people will respond likewise. Recently, Sudan went through and is still going through a revolution, I will call it, and a lot of youth have died. And one of the fathers, or the father of one of the very first people that were killed during these protests, said the following: Al-Taghyir in Arabic, it means change, Al-Taghyir. Change is our ability as the oppressed to connect with our humanity so we may elicit the highest it may offer, not only for the production of our own lives, but also to possess the ability to change the oppressor and the killer, to connect with their humanity as well. And this, in my opinion, is what revolutions intend, the creation of life. So, many times what I have done has been described as non-architectural, non-professional, but I argue that that the problem is with the profession, and the profession needs to change. So everything that I do with my students, that I do through my practice, it's about changing the built environment to achieve dignity, to achieve equity, to distribute decision-making in the built environment. And that is, again, what some of those concepts are related to. So over the years, we've looked at ideas of livable streets, the 1-hour walkable community. We've looked at the idea of interface, how a building relates to the street. We've looked at issues around control and use and ownership, and just how people inhabit the built environment and how they relate to each other in the built environment, remembering that in the way that I think the individual aspirations and the collective aspirations are always mediated by the built environment, and that's where we need to really innovate. So we also do a lot of community engagement work. We go out into communities and we work with them, and it's work that I've been doing for many, many years. And again, at the University of Pretoria, I think it was a formal email, like, this is not in line with the image of the university. That was many years ago. But then by the time I left University of Pretoria, it was published in one of their magazines as a flagship project. So one also just needs the courage to just keep doing it for years, and somehow, sometime, someone will see that this is actually meaningful work. So now this has become a lot more accepted. It's the way that we teach our students, but it's also the way that we serve the communities that are close to our universities. And none of these are quick, go in, do something and leave. None of these are, we have the solutions. I used to very arrogantly say many years ago that we are transferring technology to communities. And after years of, that was the title of my project, I was so embarrassed, and now it is skills and knowledge exchange, because we go into communities, we learn from them. But it took me years to get that, and that's the kind of work that we do. So in terms of design, when I said that there's design methods and design processes and things that you build into a project that allows for it to adapt and change, it means it allows for ongoing participation. So that's the difference between once-off participation, which I refer to without undermining it as the sit around the table and talk participation, but the way that we build and finance and manage our built environments, that is the ongoing participation that I aspire to. So that, just to make it a little bit more tangible, if your life circumstances changed, a daughter has gotten married, someone has a child, someone has died, someone has lost a job, someone has got a job, a new job that pays better, all of this, a grandmother moves in. That's what I mean by dynamic needs. And I could also give similar examples to to community needs. And you'll realize I'm always talking about individual needs and managing that in the context of collective needs. So the built environment needs to be designed in a way that allows for this very dynamic change in need. So what we've done is we've also looked at some, and this is just one snapshot of existing residential projects in cities, and we've critiqued them and said, but you're designing them so that they will be redundant and they are not affordable, and you can't adapt them through time, and that means they just are at the risk of being redundant very soon. So what does transformation look like? I use the word transformation a lot. I said many people get nervous when I talk too much about transformation. And what do equity, dignity, inclusion look like? And as an architect, that is what my day-to-day work is. What does it look like? What does it feel to move and work and inhabit a transformed city? We know what it's like to move and inhabit these kind of cities. And I think Dr. Genevieve mentioned it. We're locked up, we're traumatized, we're under constant threat. And actually, when I presented a talk on what does transformation look like, it was because I saw the cyclists from Mamelodi to Pretoria East navigating incredibly difficult traffic, unacknowledged routes through the bush, and they do it daily, and no one thinks to just make this a safer, more dignified route for them. And it was just, so the divisions in our cities anger me, but also just this constant lack of dignity and acknowledgement for those day-to-day processes greatly frustrate me. So as a built environment professional, I think it's my job to translate these concepts of transformation, equity, dignity, and inclusion into real projects. And we do that through the articulation of space and form, and through using tools such as looking at density and regulatory frameworks, harnessing what is there, arguing for change in what doesn't work, and hopefully ultimately having that big panel where we say, hey, look, this is how we've changed South African cities and made them more humane. So I don't think there's a way to achieve this without political buy-in. Laws are often passed to uphold the structures that serve the intentions of the ruling power at any time and the value systems that underpin them. Many of these laws relate to the built environment, and we need to put in place laws to realize alternative visions and a different way of life. This vision needs to be powerful, inspiring, and implementable, and that's where my role as an architect comes in. It needs to translate into tangible and felt realities in the daily lives of people. In this new vision, people collectively inhabit the city, benefiting from the opportunities it has to offer, irrespective of income level. As an alternative to current modes of decision-making in cities, this alternative approach will ensure that diverse voices are included through the financial and technical mechanisms we adopt for design decision-making. The vision caters for all the visible and hidden factors that make up the city. I'm in a profession that celebrates big projects by famous architects with massive budgets. So one of the things that I work on daily is to try and bring acknowledgement to all of those other voices and the smaller yet incredibly meaningful initiatives that make up our cities, including spatial interventions and buildings that might not be winning the awards. So I've already mentioned that we need to be more equitable, sustainable, and to function better, but I don't think people have properly understood the idea of transformation and how to translate that into practice. So I believe that to achieve transformation, we need to transform our thinking. To achieve spatial transformation, we need to transform our thinking, which means we need to transform our teaching, our practice, and our built environment professions. And in that way, transformation is multidimensional. And there needs to be, I've mentioned now the arrogance that I initially had about we had the solutions for communities. That's where the sit around the table and talk participation becomes important, is to understand real need and work based on it. And so the transformation of my profession and the built environment professions in general is key to the work that I do on a daily basis. So but if you remember what I said right in the beginning, is that we need to always balance in terms of our thinking and involvement, in terms of what is done daily and what activism we do, but also to be able to look at that in the context of strategic government investment and targeted research funding. And to acknowledge that spatial divides in our cities require complex and multidisciplinary interventions. And it's very important to note that all professions operate in a political space, and that space has been created through politics. So nothing is neutral. Nothing is neutral. Historically, technical and spatial design interventions, my profession, as part of the built environment professions, historically has been used to deepen divisions. Because technical and spatial design decisions are value-laden, they are never neutral. And this implies that technical and spatial design decision-making is a reflection of our beliefs about rights of access to the city and all the opportunities it offers, as well as a reflection of the beliefs about poverty, the poor, and their place in the city. If you do something that doesn't benefit the poor, it's because you have an idea about what your right place is in the city. So don't hide it in, oh, but that's only what they can afford, and that's being realistic. And no, you're saying something quite strong, and you need to be saying something different. And I think we have to, and I hope, and I reach my hand out to all the people that are not in the built environment professions, but are doing this work through different channels and different avenues, that we need to have a collective vision where we will be able to inspire individuals, communities, governments, policy and decision-making agencies to adopt alternative visions. And what bothers me is that the apartheid city is so powerful, it's so entrenched, we're still living in it, because they had such a strong vision, and we have the ability, the intelligence, the power to come up with a more beautiful vision that is based on concepts of human rights, of dignity, and of equity. And we have to do it. It's been too long that we've been talking about this. We really have to do it, and we have to come together and do it collectively. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip these 2 or 3 slides, but it's basically about, it's a chapter I wrote in a book called Educating the Citizen Designer in South Africa, and it talks about my design teaching practice and how we work with communities and how I've managed to do that over the years and how I see it as a form of community service that we do. So for those of you interested, please look at the book Educating Citizen Designers in South Africa. This is really what we do. This is why we are engaged with communities for years, and never for quick interventions, but always we build up the relationships with those communities over many years. So just in terms of a bit of, this might give you an idea of my background also and who I am. My very first contribution to a conference was in 1996. I was quite young, naive, and didn't know very much. But I decided to do some research on the role of architects in African countries. I was always very concerned, like, is there relevance in this profession? And my latest published contribution in the general media in 2021, after the riots, was Crisis as an Opportunity to Heal South Africa's Divisive Spatial Geographies, and you'll find that in the Mail and Guardian. Prior to that, in 2015, with Fees Must Fall, I wrote What Architects Must Learn from the South African Student Protests. And my last book chapter is We Hear You, the unheard, marginalized, and excluded, and it's on power and cities. So this snapshot of what I write about and what concerns me daily, I think it gives you a good idea of where my work is positioned. And I've already explained how I use community engagement as a mechanism to deepen our knowledge about practice as well as a service. We tend to look at cities like this, like from high up, bird's eye view. This is Khartoum. These are the blue and the white Niles meeting in Khartoum. We tend to look at my hometown. We tend to look at cities from high up and make decisions about them from high up. And we forget these day-to-day activities on the streets of our cities. And I mentioned now the cyclists going to and from Mamelodi. That's the level where we need to be operating and making a change. And even when we make high-level decisions at that level, it needs to filter down on the day-to-day lives at this level. And that's where that importance is important. But if we're operating at this level, we also need to mobilize and strongly influence the decisions at that upper level. Both go hand in hand, and that's where we really need to work together. I have said so much about this. Please listen to my podcasts, which I really need to do more, but I have 3, and I think a lot of what I've said today, you'll hear it there. I've already mentioned this article in the Mail and Guardian because I say things, very practical things, because sometimes I think if we're mobilizing and we're actively working together, we need to have a clear idea of what we're saying, for example, to government or the decision makers. I tried to do it in this article. So, for example, I would say, if you want to live behind a big wall, in a security estate, you're welcome to do so, but you can pay a wall tax. I'm just, putting it out. We need to have practical solutions. Your alternative is to activate that wall. So that edge perhaps could have a positive influence on the street. We could have small business opportunities there. We could put social housing on those edges so that the social housing and affordable housing is more accessible, so that the cyclists don't have to navigate those horrible roads. They can live right there and come to their jobs. And so that we have active eyes on the streets. We have passive surveillance on the streets. Instead of those kilometers of walls, we actually have activities on those edges that keep our streets safe. So what I tried to do in this article was, at the risk of appearing naive at the time, as if I didn't understand all the Zuma dramas and the ANC dramas, and at the risk of appearing naive, I argued very strongly for the publication of this article because I felt we needed to have those practical solutions. And let the political mess unfold, but we need to sort out our cities. And so I'd be very honored if you look at some of another solution is every Menlin and every Sandton. You should not give a development approval for something like that without a component of affordable housing being integral to the design and development of it, as an example. So we need mechanisms for city restructuring, a new paradigm, completely reconceptualizing housing as a core and critical component of our new cities. And these are, again, some project examples of how the street edges, I've spoken about that, transforming those street edges. I want to say something here. There's my house is my castle. And this is in relation to and my time is up and I'm concluding now. It's in relation to my comment about the individual and the collective. In vernacular architecture, and these are images, random images from Sudan, the house merges. You can't really identify the individual house. And that is really at odds with my house is my castle, a very kind of British idea. And I think it's also important for us to think about collective actions rather than celebrating the individual buildings. These are the contexts we work in, these are the communities we work with, co-designing always, we take great pride in the work that we do, and I conclude with this slide. So can we reimagine the African city as a livable city, equitable, beautiful, functional, has diverse opportunities, offers people a chance at improving their lives and livelihoods? And can we reimagine the African city as a lovable city that resonates with many people over many years? That's participation for me. Resonates with many people over many years, accommodates and embraces diversity, choice, and change embedded in context in terms of culture and climate. Thank you so much.